Now, I need to start with a quiz. I need to ask you a question. How many people here, if you just put up your hands, have seen Les Miserables? Okay. How many of you have read the book? Ah, pretty good, pretty good. All right, right. Well, normally we get, in a room of 100 people, 85 people have seen it and 2 people have read the book. So this is a bit of a different group. How many have done neither? Is there anybody? 1 or 2, 3, okay. Well, this speech is all built around Les Miserables. The first 80 pages in English, if you've read the book, a little longer in French. The first 90 seconds, if you've seen the play. They tend to do things that way in plays. And it's a story about the bishop's candlesticks. In the book, we are introduced very gradually. I mean, Hugo serialized this thing, so he had to make it last. But we are very gradually to the Bishop of Digne. The Bishop of Digne is a wonderful person. He is very deeply spiritual. He's very committed to his Christian values. And he in particular is one who believes that helping disadvantaged people is an important part of his calling. And as a result, to the great dismay of his parishioners, he, in his first years as a bishop, gives away most of the things that come with being a bishop. But in those days, being a bishop was a pretty lucrative pastime in terms of the things you got with it. But he gave most of that away. And at this point in the story that we're coming to, he's living fairly humbly with his sister and another woman, and I forget exactly what her relationship is, but I'm sure it was chaste, in this house from which he does his job, and he's much loved by his parishioners and those around him. And in fact, the only goods that he has left are of any particular value are some silver plates and some silver candlesticks that were given to him by his parents on the occasion of his becoming ordained. So they have great emotional as well as financial value. Jean Valjean has just been released from prison after 19 years there, and he's having a terribly difficult time because as soon as he identifies himself as basically an ex-con, nobody wants to deal with him, and he has not only no opportunity to work, but he can't even find a place to sleep or get any food. And he finally knocks on the bishop's door. He doesn't know for sure what's going to happen. He doesn't know what this guy's all about. But he knocks on the bishop's door, and the bishop takes one look at him, and he introduces him in. And they bring him in, they allow him to bathe, they provide him with supper, and they say, look, why don't you sleep the night so you can get a proper rest and then move on from there. During the night, Valjean wakes up, and after 19 years in prison, he's a hardened guy. He wakes up, he's seen the silver plate in the candlestick. He takes the silver plate, and he runs off. And he's caught by the gendarme. And the gendarme bring him back to the door, and they knock on the door, and they say, Bishop, we found this fellow, he stole your plate. And we want to return that to you, we're taking him back to jail. And the bishop looks at them and says, no, you misunderstood. He didn't steal them. I gave them to him. And also, excuse me, but you forgot, Jean, I also gave you the candlesticks. And he gives him the candlesticks, and Valjean goes off. And that's the pivotal moment in the whole book. I gave them to him, and you forgot, I also gave you the candlesticks. Now, I read that story for the first time in a condensed version when I was about 12 years old, and I couldn't figure it out. Like, what was he thinking? And I'm sure I spent several sleepless nights trying to figure out what was he thinking until it started gradually. The story finally started to make sense to me. It took a long time. And ever since then, I've found it a fascinating story. And when I taught this in Sunday school, because it's a great Sunday school, it's a parable outside the Bible, I used to say to the kids, and I'll say to you now, when do you think he made that decision? When do you think he made that decision? I'll give you some choices. Did he make the decision when he opened the door and found the gendarme there with the silver plate? Do you think that's when he made the decision? I don't. I don't think you can be that quick. Do you think he made it at the point in time that he invited Jean Valjean to sleep overnight? And he said, I'm not sure this is going to happen, but I won't be surprised if it does. Or do you think he made the decision that the moment when he saw Valjean at the door the first time, the evening before, and Valjean was there and he said, well, I'm not sure what's going to happen if I invite this guy in, but I'm going to do it and we'll see what happens. Maybe that's when he made the decision. But I don't think it is. Because I think his decision was as natural to him as it is for you and I to breathe. And what you heard, or what you saw in that story, was simply him reflecting what was in his nature. That his values were so deeply rooted that it was the obvious and natural thing to do. I love this story. I love this story because it says, in moments of great stress, it's when your values really show. Values are often kind of there or not, but not making that much difference. And when you find out what somebody's values are all about, or what an organization's values are all about, is when there's stress, when the things are on the spotlight, when the things are tested by circumstances. So a question for you to ask yourself now is, what would you have done? And I will tell you that I don't think you could make it up at the door. Whatever you would have done will be determined long in advance by what is in your nature now, or what is in your nature long before that happens. Now, from that rather exalted territory, I want to go to some other more mundane stuff, but it sort of illustrates. We're going to have some sad stories, and at the end we'll have a little more pleasant story. Illustrates how big organizations under stress often show what their values are or are not. Do you remember when the Exxon Valdez crashed on the rocks in Alaska? I don't know what it is, 20 years ago, something like that. Some of the most pristine coastline in the world. And they spilt a zillion gallons of oil and ruined it. Do you remember what Exxon's reaction was? Initial reaction? Not by their CEO, but by somebody far enough down the ranks that they'd be disposable, was to blame the captain for drinking. Okay? Like this, like the public is really interested in Exxon's disagreements with their captain. Okay? And it was a long time before they said, wait a minute, this ship, which was carrying our oil, is ruining some of the most precious parts of the environment in the world, and our responsibility is to do everything we can to fix it, and so on. It ended up costing them a ton of money. They ended up paying for the fix-up, plus some liability suits, plus a terrible damage to their reputation. But their initial reaction was to get in the newspaper and blame their captain, as if anybody else in the world cares about that. Do you remember it was around the same era, Union Carbide had a plant in Bhopal, India, and they had a cyanide leak. 2,000 people were killed and a great many more were injured. Do you remember what their reaction was? They blamed the Indian people, the people in India who were running that plant. As if, rather than saying, my goodness, 2,000 people have been killed by our plant and a whole bunch of others injured, we are going to expend every resource in our company to try and make this better, to try and sort of fix it. They got into this thing about blaming people who were their employees in India, as if anybody else on the planet cared about that difference. I mean, what did their values look like at that point in time? A more recent and fortunately less dramatic example, poor old Martha Stewart. Okay, Martha Stewart I think she did it by mistake. She did some insider trading, made 50 grand. I mean, it's a rounding error in her bank account. And all she should have said was, golly, that was stupid. I'm sorry. I'm going to give all the money to the nearest charity and move on. And she would have got a wrist slap. But instead, she lied about it. Not only that, she encouraged her broker to lie about it. So she ended up going to jail because she got confused about what was in her self-interest with what was right and what was wrong. Now, I picked those three examples because none of the people who were running Exxon, or the people who are running Union Carbide, or for that matter, Martha Stewart, are not fundamentally bad people. Okay, I would differentiate them from the people who are running Enron or Tyco or Adelphia, or possibly even Conrad, not my cousin Black. Who were crooks, okay? I mean, especially, well, probably all of them, but not only were doing the wrong thing, they knew they were doing the wrong thing, and it was just a question of whether they could get away with it or not. These people above were not bad people. They were people who, under stress, didn't do the right thing. I'll give you the most recent and profound example, and for those of you who think a lot about investing, a very instructive one. Merck. Merck are the people who make, among other things, Vioxx, one of these arthritis drugs. I think it's a COX inhibitor or something like that. And this was a very profitable drug for Merck. It was worth $1 billion a year. One of the problems you have in the, if you're in the pharmaceuticals business in the United States, is you have a very rigorous front-end process for approving drugs, but you have actually a rather lax process for the supervision of drugs after their approval. In other words, it's a big hurdle to get over to get your drug approved, but once it is, it's not that easy for the regulators to kind of tell you you're not allowed to sell that drug anymore. And Merck made a big mistake that, if you only take one thing from this speech, remember what I'm going to say right now. Compliance with the law is not the same thing as doing the right thing. Compliance with the law is not the same thing as doing the right thing. How many organizations have learned that lesson over and over again? Yes, we were complying. No, we didn't do the right thing. Merck always complied with the law, with Vioxx. No regulator ever told them that they had to take the drug off the market, and they confused that with doing the right thing. Because meanwhile, a lot of people were having heart attacks after using their drug. And even though the regulator never did tell them that they had to stop, eventually they pulled the drug. They pulled the drug in September of 2004. They have sustained enormous financial damage. They've lost their $1 billion a year product. Their reputation, which was pristine before this, has severely damaged. And they're going to pay out at least $10 billion in lawsuits, probably more, but at least $10 billion. Just to give an idea of how much money, the market capitalization of Merck since that time has dropped by 45 to 50 billion, that's with a B, $billion. That's what the Royal Bank of Canada is worth. That's more than any single company in Canada is worth, has been lost in Merck, because they couldn't tell the difference between compliance and doing the right thing. And because they knew, they had all the evidence that was coming in about what was happening with it. And I submit that their values were in the wrong place, and they did not stand up well to this strain. And what they lost was the equivalent of the value of the Royal Bank of Canada. I just picked that because you guys are here. But, I could have said Encana or Manulife, but it would have been the same conclusion. Now, contrast that with a story also about 20 years old, Johnson & Johnson Tylenol. About 20 years ago, some people taking Tylenol got sick. 2 of them died. Now, this happened because some nut went into a store and tampered with the packaging and put poison in the pills. Now, did Johnson & Johnson say, gee whiz, we're going to join OJ in search of the killer, or, get around and blame me? No. They said, we're in business to make people well. We want our products to make people well. We want people to feel confident when they take our product off the shelf that it's going to make them well. And that's the only thing that matters to us, is that we want people to feel confident when they take our product off the shelf that it's going to make them well. And that was their deeply rooted value. They did not make that value up on the spot. It had been deeply rooted long before this crisis moment came. And so they did what came natural to them. They took the entire stock of the product off the shelf in every store in the world. And they spent an enormous, and they wouldn't put it back on the shelf until they had created a tamper-proof cap. All right. This was not something that they just sort of made up their values on the spot. They had deeply rooted values which guided them to the right conclusion at that time. And the result of it was that obviously that quarter sales weren't too good, but a year later they had fully recovered. And they have a wonderful reputation. People still talk about this story. One of the things I find intensely irritating is this is taught in public relations schools as a great exercise in public relations. It is. You go to the Mount and take the course, this is right on the top of it. The thing that they don't usually mention is that they did not have a public relations department at that time. Okay? This was not a triumph in public relations. It was a triumph in values. And it was, not only was it the right thing to do, it was damn good business. Just contrast what they did with what Merck did. Okay, the Merck people were not bad people. You know, they're into this because they want to make people well. But under stress, their values didn't do so well. Now, I want to read you or tell you a much more pedestrian story than the ones that I've told you so far. And it's got a subtlety to it that if I'd started with it, you probably would miss whether or not there's any values in this story at all. So let me walk, but it's smaller scale and therefore I hope a little more accessible. This is a story about Steve and Ted. Steve and Ted are two guys, each of whom wanted to get into the restaurant business. And Steve was actually a tax accountant, but he had lots of clients who had been in the restaurant business, so he thought he knew something about it, and so he had it in mind that he would set up a Tex-Mex restaurant and hopefully build a chain out of it. And his understanding of what was really important in that business was location, atmosphere, and cost control. And Ted was really a chef. His specialty was Provençal cuisine. He was pretty good at it. He was a little frustrated being an employee because it didn't let him do the things exactly the way he wanted to. So he decided he'd go out on his own, as so many of those folks do. Big commitment to quality. Steve was really good, the business part of the stuff. He was able to get a nice long-term lease on a restaurant in a restaurant space in a high-traffic area. He was able to negotiate good terms with his bank. He went out and benchmarked the other Tex-Mex restaurants in his area to see what the best, approaches were in sort of menu and uniforms and stuff like that. He wanted to make sure he kept his costs down, so for his staff, he mostly used part-time university students who were full of fun and full of life, even though they were a bit inexperienced. And he made a long-term deal with a food wholesaler. That was the way he kept his food prices down. He started out with a big marketing campaign, television, advertising, and so on. And in the first 6 months, his business was very good. But there were some issues with consistency of food, consistency of service. And even though business was good, the number of repeat customers was actually quite low. And, long after he should have kind of established a regular clientele, he kept having to spend quite a bit of money on advertising in order to keep business there. So after a while, the numbers weren't looking too good. So he said, well, maybe if I bought a second location, I would be able to, do better because then I could, I'd have more overall market presence and my advertising dollars would go further. So we bought out another guy who had been in this business, set up a separate location, but ultimately the same sort of business mathematics applied. He kept having to spend a lot of money if he stopped spending advertising money, the business went down. If he kept spending it, the business was there, but the margins weren't. And eventually, after a couple of years, he had to pack it in. His business just wasn't working. Now, Ted, meanwhile, started out rather more modestly. He wasn't as skilled with banks, so he was doing most of this with his life savings. He couldn't afford a fancy location, and he started out quite slowly. And furthermore, he hired for his staff 2 or 3 people who he knew from the business, he knew were very experienced and very good, but also were more expensive. They spent a lot of time on their menus trying to make sure that they were going to be really excellent. And he worked very closely with the local sort of fishmonger, produce, butcher, and so on to make sure that they would deliver stuff fresh daily. This made it more expensive, but it also meant that his quality was going to be assured. He started out rather slowly, but what happened is that both his repeat business was good and the word of mouth was good. So after a while, business picked up. A little while later, he was busy during the weekdays. He was packed on the weekends. And once he'd finished paying off all his original loans, he said, well, maybe we can do a second location, which in due course he did because he had such a good reputation. And he took it a second location in a high-traffic area that had recently been vacated by a Tex-Mex chain. Now, this is obviously, I said to you, a much more subtle story. But here's the difference between Steve and Ted. Steve wanted to make money. And he said, I think we'll do it in the food business. I think that's my best opportunity to make money. I mean, being a tax accountant, you got to see lots of different businesses and what their books like. He said, I want to make some money. I think I'll do it in the food business. Ted said, I want to cook great food, and I hope I can make a buck at it. I want to cook great food, and I hope I can make a buck at it. And I'll say to you that I think almost any business that is going to have long-term success has to start with a goal that's more exciting than making money. Okay, it's nothing wrong with making money, but if that is your first goal, it won't work. I'm only going to say 2 sentences about Maritime Life because I didn't want to get particularly into that, but what we said in our goals was we want to satisfy every customer, toward that to satisfy every employee, and as a result, we'll have superior growth and profits. And our employees focused totally on those first 2 goals, and they said, yeah, the growth and the profits will show up. I will tell you, it worked. A lot of people said to me, gee, Bill, it's lucky you made so much money so you could do all those things for your employees. I said, you completely misunderstand what we're about. Okay, we make so much money because we do all those things for our employees and because we do all those things for our customers. And that's why we are a successful organization. So, my thought that I want to leave for you today is if you're running an organization, particularly if you're running a business organization, don't think of your goal as making money first. It's not even that exciting, especially if you're not the owner. It's not that exciting to get I had options, it was okay. But I mean, it's not that exciting to get up, oh, gee, I wonder how we're going to make more money for the shareholder today. I did not find that motivating. I found it tremendously motivating to get up every morning and say, gee, I wonder what we can do today to make our employees feeling better about what they're doing or to make our customers feel better about what we're doing. That was exciting to me. And I think most businesses, it's more exciting to get up and say, what can I do to make our customers feel better about what we're doing? And the profit will show up. You'd be surprised. It works. Thank you. It is absolutely essential that the CEO thinks it's really important. That's the starting point. The CEO has to think it's really important. Do not, under any circumstance, have a vice president of values, okay? Well, that's his department, yeah. Because you can bet he won't be there when the Tylenol caps get tampered with. Okay, the CEO's got to think it's very important, and the CEO has to have a process in which values are created that are fully understood and endorsed by the entire organization. Now, when we did it the first time, we had 600 employees, and 600, yeah, about 600 employees, and we were actually able to involve all 600 employees in creating our value statements. You know, it wasn't just the one I gave you. There was about 21 sentences that came after that. And it was really good. And they were very much aspirational. You know, they were statements. These are the things that we want to be. We didn't proclaim that we were perfect at all of them. We knew we were imperfect at all of them. But they were the aspirations. And because we involved all the employees, they were well understood. And the CEO has to feel as accountable to those statements as everybody else. In fact, matter of fact, the most accountable to those values. They're sort of the top of your hierarchy. When we did one of our acquisitions, we all of a sudden we were 2,000 employees. We actually managed to involve 300 or 400 of them in doing it again, and sort of updating it, and that was okay. We were able to do it. Once we were up to about 3,000 employees, I think it gets difficult. If you're the Royal Bank of Canada with whatever it is, 50,000 employees, you can't involve all 50,000 employees in doing it. But you should involve a lot more people than just the senior people in doing it. What I found is that when we got into discussions about certain things, the frontline people who were dealing directly with customers were much more insightful about certain questions than the executives were. I'll give you one simple example. This business' first goal to satisfy every customer. I remember a debate with a bunch of different people from the company about how we were going to talk about customer satisfaction, because we hadn't phrased a sentence yet. And, we had too many actuaries. So one of them said, well, maybe we should aim for 90% because we'll never do better than 90%, and yada, yada, yada. And one of the employees in the front line stood up and said, I can't deal with that. I said, what am I supposed to do? Every 10th call, I won't bother trying to, give me something I could deal with. So it was great. And we said, okay, yeah, So first, to satisfy every customer. Will we get to that goal? No. But you see what I'm saying? So you have to involve, if you can't involve every employee, you have to involve, a broad cross-section of employees in doing it. And then, basically, when you've got the value statements, you're at the end of the beginning. If the next thing that happens is that they kind of go onto a shelf, or everybody's shelf, you're actually worse off than if you had never done it. You'd be much better off never to have done it than that. They've got to be very alive, and you have to have a variety of ways of constantly testing yourself and say, are we adhering? Where we're not, how do we do better? And involving all the employees in that. Our employee surveys we did every year, a big part of them was testing employees' perception about whether or not we were living up to the values and where we were falling down. I don't know whether we had been profit-oriented only. When we kind of did this, when the value statements there were not created, they were discovered. All right, they were not created. I remember the very first day we worked on this. When we started off, because we didn't know what to do until we kind of got into it. The first meeting we had was with about the top 25 people in the company. And I was running this meeting. This is January 10th, 1992. And I had told them before Christmas, I said, we're going to have this meeting, which is going to be an all-day meeting, and we're going to ask you some questions that we normally don't talk about in business. And one of the questions, and there was 4 or 5 of them, but the one that I remember clearly was this: what is it, apart from making money, that you want to get out of your job? And this is making money personally. What is it, not that making money personally wasn't important, but what is it, apart from making money, that you want to get out of your job? And those 4 or 5 questions, and people had been told in advance. And they were very good. Everybody came, and they had spent some time thinking about it. And they were very open about their issues. And what was fun, we were, at that time, as many organizations were, somewhat dysfunctional. In other words, people didn't get along and stuff like that. And they were at odds frequently with each other. And what was a wonderful process to watch was this sense of discovered convergence. And people would kind of go around the table, and then sort of person A would speak, and then a little while later, person D, that he thought was a complete jerk, would speak. And they'd say, oh my God, he thinks the same things I do. I never knew that. And so those people who didn't really actually work together very well found out that they actually had a lot of common values at that point in time. And then it kind of went from there. But I don't think we created anything. I just think we just sort of discovered it, kind of brought it together. Now, I will say this. There were some people who just didn't, their values, or wherever they were coming from, didn't fit with the values that we ended up speaking. It's very important to the success of your organization to help those people find other careers. It's very, very important. It's important to them, too. It's not good for them to be around, but it is absolutely important for your organization to help those people find other careers. Because it's just, they won't be happy, and we weren't happy, and we were always too slow, but that's what we had to do. Let me just say this, Mary. When we wrote the statements the first time, I'm trying to think, we had 600 employees, of whom about 400 would have been in Atlantic Canada. When we did it the second time, we had 2,000, of which only maybe 800 or 900 would have been Atlantic Canada. And some of the best parts of our statements were actually written in Toronto or written in Montreal, with employee meetings we had there. So I don't think it is peculiar to here, but there is something about the air or the water here, I think, that does somehow work better. I don't even know I can't explain it, but I believe it. This sort of, first of all, I think one of the reasons that so many people are enthusiastic about the Center for Ethics that we're here to, I'm here on behalf of, is because there is growing interest in this topic. I worry that it will be a fad rather than built on deep-seated conviction about really what needs to be done. But there is more stuff being done in this area, but sometimes I worry that it will be a fad. The notion that making money should not be your first goal does not play well with, say, the analyst community. The analysts are the worst villains in this, the analysts and the accountants. Sorry, Paula, but it's true. I want you to pretend. Remember Steve and Ted? I want you to pretend for a moment that they had publicly traded stock. Okay, the analysts would have loved the Tex-Mex place, because they would have capitalized all that advertising expense. It wouldn't have shown up right, and they would have had growing sales and all that. For the 6 months, the analysts would have loved the Tex-Mex stock, and they would have hated the other one. You know what I mean? Where is this guy? His sales are hardly anything. You see, they wouldn't have done the stomach test. They wouldn't have gone and eaten in both restaurants and said, "How's the food?" Okay, all they look at is the damn numbers. I used to be a numbers guy, and so anyway, I worry that it won't actually take root because the analysts don't push that way. But businesses where it does will do very well. And J&J is widely admired. There are other companies that are widely admired. You have no idea how accurate you are. Did everybody hear what he said? Because you're exactly bang on. And did you ever have this expression, because we used to have this, did you ever have the expression, people say, "We don't do things like this around here"? Did anybody ever say that in your organization? We don't do, as if the person making that expression is an authority on how we do things around here. And I used to hear that expression, and when we finished creating the value statement, I said, that is how we do things around here, and that is all. Nobody is allowed to invoke, out of the ethos, more statements about how we do things around here. And anybody who is obviously making a commitment to try to do things in line with those values is to be supported, even when they get it wrong. Because they were trying to live with it. And so you're exactly right. Those value statements give everybody direction, and it's all the direction. I'll give you a very clear and simple example. We did a lot of acquisition activity, merger and acquisition activity. We did 4 big acquisitions, okay? Now, well, people don't normally think of the business of doing acquisitions as a sort of a value-driven activity. But for us, it was. And when you do 4 deals, there's a lot that you look at that you don't do. And when we looked at every deal that we considered, the first question we asked is, can we satisfy this group of customers? If we do this deal, can we end up with satisfied customers, and can we end up with satisfied employees? And that drove every decision we made on mergers and acquisitions. And some deals that looked superficially attractive we walked away from, because after we considered some of the businesses we just thought were crap. Excuse my language, but it's just, when I looked at what it was actually doing for customers, it just wasn't delivering good value for customers. But some of the businesses were very profitable. If you buy a car, the car dealer will try to sell you insurance, life and disability. It's terrible value, okay? And there was a company we looked at that had a big, very profitable business in that. But we said, we're not buying that company because that business is not good for the customers. And, we'd have to either give it away or just sell it or whatever, and it was most of the profits of the company. So it was, believe it or not, the first test of all of our merger and acquisition activity was, can we end up with satisfied customers and employees if we do this deal? I could give you lots of other ones, but that's the most obvious one. First of all, I would have absolutely no experience with that because we only did business in Canada. And, our business is like banking. It's all air, right? I mean, we don't actually make anything. We just, take money in and hand it back. I mean, try to keep some.
Yeah. That are offshore.
Yeah, but we didn't use them. So I just need to first of all underline my ignorance of the core topic. But if we were in a business, if you were in a business that did it, that was in that situation, when I said that little thing I said to you about the goals, there was 21 sentences underneath that that talked about our relationships with customers and relationships working with each other, and also about growth and learning. If we were in a business that was like that, you would end up with some value statements about the question you asked, and those would be the drivers, because it's a sensible and important question. And so how you deal with that and how you balance that trade-off between, creating employment in parts of the world that are glad to have it versus exploiting people out there, is a kind of question you need to struggle with and articulate a value that everybody can live with. Well, we didn't take in a lot of business schools types.
Is that the answer?
Yeah, that is part of the answer. I will just say this to you. I think our natural genetic predisposition, if we're working for a place that provides service to people, our natural genetic predisposition is to want to give good service. It's more fun to give good service than to give bad service. It's just more fun. So I think that's where all people start until we ruin them, and sometimes it's the business schools that ruin them, sometimes it's the employers that ruin them. So I think most people start in the right place, and we didn't take too many business school days. So down in the back, Patrick. The answer is by proving that it works. And for this purpose, it works means that we're doing better than them in the marketplace. And the reality was that, not only in Halifax, but within our industry, we had a good and improving reputation, not just for, growth. We were growing, we were making lots of money, and for doing a good job for customers, but also people noticed that all their good employees wanted to work for us. Okay, and when they kept losing some of their best employees to us, they'd say, "Well, gee, what's going on here?" So jealousy is a big motivator, and that's the way. I would never have called a meeting, and if a couple times I got invited to tell people what we did, and I gave them a very thin version of what I'm telling you now. I think our values, some of them, get rooted really early. There is, it's a subject that worries me. Anne-Marie, this is my daughter-in-law, Anne-Marie, she and I and my sons and my other daughter have talked about this a few times, because in an increasingly secular world, people don't hear a lot of the biblical stories that I grew up with, and a lot of people do. And to me, when you learn a lot of those stories, they kind of plant some of those ideas in your head. And that doesn't have to, this is not a Christian versus other faith thing. All of the faith traditions have stories that plant these values. And I worry in an increasingly secular world whether these values will be planted well enough or not. So I guess I don't have any other way of saying it. It doesn't have to be from a particular faith tradition, but I think the faith traditions are very important to establishing some of these in people's heads. And that's when you're going to get that discovered convergence. It's not clear to me otherwise how those things will happen. It's not a coincidence that story about the bishop's candlesticks involves a bishop. It's paradoxical to me that probably certainly in the Western world, the most church-oriented country by far is the United States. Okay, church attendance in the States is far higher than any other country in the Western world, and yet I despair somewhat of the values that are practiced there by corporate leaders. On average, there's some wonderful good examples, but there's a lot of bad examples too. I can't make any sense of this. If, when we created them in 1992, I said, somebody said, well, will we review these every 2 or 3 years? I said, no, we will probably never look at them again. If you ever say things aren't written in stone, this is written in stone. Okay, and the reason I said that was because it's not that they were perfect, but it took, my view was, and it was correct, was that it would take 3 or 5 years for them to really be instilled throughout the organization, so they became a common vocabulary for everybody and a reference point that everybody agreed on. And in a world where everything's changing, I thought employees should have one thing they could come in every day and say, that's the same today as it was yesterday and will be tomorrow. We did actually do a tune-up in 2000, and that's because we took on 1,000 more employees, and I wanted them to have a chance to participate in the process so that they would feel ownership. But it really was a tune-up. It wasn't a redo. And I only did that because of the dramatic change we had been through. I wish I could say otherwise, but those 3,000 employees became part of a worldwide organization of whatever it is, 30,000 employees, and where the CEO has a completely different orientation. And so within that organization, they will be lost. We did, not immediately. I think certainly the day we finished writing them, and even though we had involved all staff, there was a very healthy skepticism among staff about whether this thing would become real. And I think it took us 2 or 3 years of constantly, visibly, both acknowledging where we were imperfect, and doing things to try and, quietly to work towards it. That people said, okay, I guess they really mean it, and this is fun. A very simple example. We said our first goal was to satisfy every customer. And we created various forums for people to challenge management. I won't explain how they work. But so when somebody stood up and said, excuse me, if our first goal is to satisfy every customer, why are our bonuses based on growth and profit? Pretty sensible question. And so we changed it so that our bonuses were, and incidentally, we had a customer satisfaction award, and on that part of our bonuses, every employee got the same number of dollars. And so that was a very visible, tangible evidence that we really meant it when we said our first goal is to satisfy every customer. So, but it's years before people believe it. Absolutely. And the hard part is that it's not a good idea for the CEO to write these goals. Okay? When I talked about discovered convergence, okay, what it is to kind of draw it out and for people to recognize that they agree with each other. I mean, I had a hand in some of them, but a lot of them were written by people completely different. We had a sort of a summary statement that we had at the bottom of all these values, and it said, if it's good for your customer and it makes sense, then do it. And that was a statement that was much more than empowerment. Empowerment gives people permission to do certain things. This gave them direction to do certain things. And it said you are supposed to break the rules when the rules are dumb, and you know that they're dumb. You have enough knowledge to make that evaluation. That statement was written by a group of employees in one of our Toronto sales offices. Okay, sort of different groups created different statements and sort of threw them into the hopper. That's where that one was written. But everybody liked it, so it's a tricky thing. You got to kind of discover this stuff, not author too much of it. You know, the air's thin at the top, eh? And, uh, and the CEO normally will not write things that really resonate with people on the front lines. So you got to discover it, and then you got to champion, and you've got to be exceptionally humble. You've got to always acknowledge that whatever the aspiration is that you've stated, you'll be imperfect at, and so on. And the CEO's got to be absolutely accountable to those statements. And it takes a long time. It's fun. Sometimes we would come across situations where probably, for whatever reason, we didn't think that the values gave us a very clear direction as to what to do. You know, and maybe that's because we hadn't written them exactly correctly or we weren't thinking about it the right way, but that was sometimes frustrating. There's a very fine line between pragmatic and expedient, and sometimes, you know, in business you have to be pragmatic, I might say that, you know, and sometimes finding that line between pragmatic and expedience was difficult. So, yeah. You know, does that make sense when I say that difference between pragmatic and expedient? Yeah. So I would say that was very difficult. But this was mostly a lot of fun. Yeah. Once we got it going. The odd thing was, you know, we were dealing with a single shareholder, which is the John Hancock, and if I said that their way of doing things bore any resemblance to this, I'd be completely misleading you. You know, they didn't. Fortunately, they treated us with benign neglect, and so we were able to do this. And after a while, they noticed the numbers were okay, so they didn't really care about the rest of it. I mean, they really didn't care, but it was fine. You know, I think if you were a publicly traded organization, it would be more difficult to do what we did than in the situation we were. Because publicly traded organizations are under constant pressure from analysts, you know, what are you going to do for me next quarter? And it's hard for a CEO to say, actually, you know what, next quarter we're going to make less money because we're going to spend some money, we're going to make an investment that won't show up in profits for 3 years. And the analysts hate that. And, you know, you need to do that sometimes. Yeah. The great thing that values do is it will encourage you to make long-term investments. Well, I'll say this. One of my reasons for getting involved in politics is I really thought, and I continue to feel, that John Hamm did a good job of making integrity fashionable in public life. And I said, gee, that's a good idea, and that should be supported and should be continued. And so I guess, and you know, I think the pressures to end up doing the right thing in political life, I think, will be much greater. You're under the microscope all the time. You're under the spotlight all the time. If you misspeak on a topic, you will be, you know, the press will quote you or misquote you, as the case may be, and you'll have to live with it for a long time. So I worry about that aspect of it. But I think that if you're, I believe that having strong values can be a very, very good support to a person who wants to be in public life. And it's made it easier for me quite frequently when I go out and I do these political sessions and people ask me a question to say to them, you know, I don't have a clue what you're talking about, because it happens to be true. And people actually respond quite warmly to that when they do it. Thank you.